Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Blitzkrieg, our own strategic affairs show. A lot has been spoken in the mainstream media and the social media about the Mountain Strike Corps. There have been insinuations, there have been a lot of guesswork going on, and people want to know what all this is about. So today I have a very special guest, Lieutenant General Subrata Saha, former Deputy Chief of Indian Army, responsible for capability development and modernization, formerly Kashmir Corps Commander, and also formerly additional DGMO when the Mountain Strike Corps was sanctioned. Currently, he is a member of the National Security Advisory Board. Sir, Jai Hind, and a very warm welcome to our show, sir.
Jai Hind, thank you.
So my first question is, there have been a lot of questions about the Mountain Strike Corps. And people have started thinking of it as a certain, the final argument that India would have in the circumstances of a war. What exactly is a Mountain Strike Corps, sir?
Well, let me try and answer the question from the very basics. As the name suggests, mountain meaning this corps is meant to be operating in the high altitude mountainous terrain. That means at altitudes roughly varying from say around 10,000 feet above the mean sea level to about 18,000 feet. So implications of that are, A, it must be able to operate in rarefied air, which has implications both on the man and the machine in terms of derating of machines and of course issues to do with breathing and all else as far as the human being is concerned. Let's come to the second word, that is strike. In any warfare, it is typically like a boxing game, you're defending from one and doing the offense from the other side. So it's a mixture of defense and offense. So now, when we are deployed along the borders, the defensive role is performed by what we typically call the pivot corps, and the offensive role is performed by the strike corps. So that's where the second word, strike corps, comes into being. The third word, corps, typically a unit comprising around 900 plus people, is a battalion, and very, very standard organization wise, and I say standard because it's not sacrosanct, 3 battalions would typically make a brigade, 3 brigades would make a division, some divisions put together would be a corps, and then come up to a command. So that's how the 3 words could be understood. Being a Mountain Strike Corps, first of all, because of its offensive role, it is important that they are oriented more towards the enemy and the objectives which are there in the enemy territory, unlike a pivot corps, which is looking at defending the territory and carrying out some limited offensive actions like in terms of counteroffensive or securing some launch pads through which the strike corps could go. So that is as far as the orientation and as far as the training is concerned. Now when we have to equip this formation, we have to equip them for the 2 things, that is for an offensive role, and we have to equip them for being able to operate in the altitudes of the mountains that I just mentioned. Having said that, because this is looking from an offensive into the enemy territory, obviously the quality of intelligence that they require should be of a very high order, whether it is strategic intelligence, operational or tactical intelligence. So ISR capabilities, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance capability for this formation is of primary importance. Again, because it is an offensive formation, it will be operating within enemy territory. So technologically, particularly in terms of electronic warfare, cyber warfare capability, they have to be equipped with the correct wherewithal to be able to discharge their functions. So that is the crux of what a Mountain Strike Corps, to put it for very basic understanding, if you will.
My next question is, sir, that does it have a specific area of operations, or can the commanders, the corps commander, the army commander or the army chief or the entire national security apparatus, can it pretty much pick and choose where we want to deploy these troops? Like for example, everybody is talking about Ladakh nowadays, but should it come to Arunachal, does the Mountain Strike Corps have that kind of a flexibility that no, not Ladakh, we are going to Arunachal? Is that a possibility, sir?
Okay, let me just take a cue from the Western Front to answer your question. You know, along the Western Front, we have 3 strike corps. So clearly, for each theatre, that is for every command, there is a strike corps. Now, as far as the Northern Front is concerned, we have just been able to reach somewhere with this first Mountain Strike Corps. So obviously, it is a huge stretch, you know, 3,000, almost 500 kilometers for a full strike corps to be able to look after. So quite clearly, one is not enough. But does that mean that you don't even have one? So the answer to your question is, well, there will be prioritizing of the theatre in which they have to be employed because of the requirement of orientation, because of the requirements of training, because of requirements of familiarization through which they will go. So theoretically, yes, they can operate because they have the wherewithal, they have the training. But if you look at the other issues of orienting to the area of operations, if you look at the other issues of, you know, coordination of passage through the pivot corps and so on, obviously it would be desirable to have prioritization for this corps so that it is able to prepare itself for its operations. And if you go back recently to the exercise Him Vijay, which was conducted around September, October last year, that was conducted in Arunachal. So if obviously as we speak now, their orientation and familiarization is of a higher order when it comes to the Eastern Theatre. As far as the Northern Theatre is concerned, well, I would like to believe that certain amount of reconnaissance and other things would have been done. But in terms of preparedness, it appears that the priority is in the Eastern Theatre.
Sir, you mentioned about a strike corps going inside enemy territory because the very nature of a strike corps is offensive in nature. So that is why strike corps are created in the first place. They are not defensive corps, they are not pivot corps, they are hardcore strike corps, which means they cleave into territory, they go deep inside the enemy areas and operate there. Now, especially in the mountains, if you're talking about high altitude, after 9,000 feet, there is a difficulty in breathing. So we have this acclimatization, and then there is super high altitude. As you go higher, you spend days acclimatizing and getting used to it. Now, when you're talking about operating across the border, sir, in such a scenario, how important is airlift capability? I'm sure it's important for every strike corps, sir, whether mountain or not. But especially in these areas where, you know, even covering 12 kilometers or 15 kilometers can take sometimes even 1 or 2 days because walking is very tough. And, you know, at those heights, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18,000 feet, it's torturous even to take a few steps. Many people who have not been posted there or haven't seen those altitudes may find it difficult to believe, but walking a few steps is a pain. It's a huge challenge. When you're talking about a strike corps, obviously, sir, the first thing that comes to mind is speed and mobility. That is the general perception. What do you do in a mountain strike corps to generate speed and mobility, sir?
Well, it's a very interesting question that you ask. First and foremost is this corps must have strategic mobility. By strategic mobility, I mean they should be able to move across theatres. For that, as you are aware, we have equipped the Indian Armed Forces with the C-130, that is the latest, and of course the legacy IL-76 also continues. Then next we come to the issue of tactical mobility, which is provided by the heavy lift helicopters. We are aware of the Chinooks being inducted into the armed forces. So that's how you are building up your tactical mobility going forward. Of course, the Dhruv, that is the advanced light helicopters, they are also adding to the tactical mobility. That said, obviously, again, there will be prioritization when we talk about particularly the tactical airlift. So as we speak, I think the tactical airlift, obviously the priority goes for the special forces. And as far as the infantry formations are concerned, the regular infantry formations are concerned, they would be, having got strategically airlifted into the area of operations, it would be reasonable to assume that they would be employed to begin with as far as possible with appropriate transport. By appropriate, I mean wherever heavier transport is possible, good. If not, we have to go in for the smaller vehicles, typically what we use, the 2.5 tonners and so on. and sometimes maybe even lighter vehicles, because you have all kinds of roads and tracks over which the mobility has to be achieved. And then, as per the requirement, to even advance further using foot, and sometimes even logistically supported by animal transport as well. So it will be a multiple modes of transportation that would be required to have this formation going forward for carrying out its objective. And again, I get back to my point about ISR. I think that's absolutely critical for this formation, because where exactly to employ them is a very, very crucial decision in the war, because you have to know exactly where how the enemy is going about. And particularly if you look at our eastern sector, where the Chinese have to cross a major river, so it is quite easily possible to discern the intent and plan your operations accordingly. So therefore, the ISR becomes so very important. And now again, getting back to the mobility bit, even when you look at it from the point of view of all the combat support elements that have to be moved, the government has recently procured, in fact, they had started in my time when I was the deputy chief, the ultralight the ultralight howitzers, which is typically suited for this kind of terrain, and similarly some of the other equipment which is being procured to be sure that that kind of mobility is there. When we come to the logistics support, again, a fair amount of adaptation is required. I did mention in passing about at places you might be required to be supported logistically using animal transport, or for that matter, you might be using a lighter or medium vehicles like the 2.5 tonners or lesser to be able to support your forces going forward. And again, because of these challenges of mobility, it is crucial to have very high order of engineering support, the combat engineering support for a formation like this. And given the way the situation is unfolding, it is quite clear from the way Chinese have gone about it in this between April and May. The intention of the Chinese, the strategic objectives have undergone a change. It has undergone a change from trying to contain India. It is, if not destroy, degrade India's influence and power. So we are seeing it exactly that unfolding on the line of actual control. We are seeing the same thing happening indirectly through some of our neighboring countries. And all this is actually not all of a sudden. If you see from the time that President Xi Jinping sort of started to consolidate power, you have seen this happening. In November 2012, he was made the chairman of the Central Military Commission and General Secretary of Chinese Communist Party. On 14th March 2013, he became the president, and 29th March 2013, I think in South Africa, Durban, he had said we should resolve the border issue amicably and quickly. And exactly 17 days later, on 15th April 2013, the Depsang intrusion happened. And from that time onwards, whether it was Depsang, Chumar, Doklam, and a whole lot of other intrusions where, which were less reported, the intention is very clear. First intrude, assert, offer negotiations, and then start protracting the negotiations. We are seeing the same thing unfolding today in Ladakh. So in a situation like this, where the complete northern front is being activated, even this time around 5th, 6th May, we saw something happening in North Sikkim, and then it moved on to Ladakh. So quite clearly, we need capability, because whereas we may be fighting a defensive battle somewhere, you may be looking at restoring an adverse situation, a mountain strike corps becomes critical to be able to make substantial gains so that at conflict termination, you are in a stronger position.
Jointness is the holy grail that we all seek. At least I think we all seek. This entire thing about jointness, the capability or the ability of the Army, Navy and Air Force to function and fight together. So when we talk about a mountain strike corps, sir, how important is jointness specifically in the context of a mountain strike corps? How do you see it unfolding? I mean, we talk about the Rafales, we have our Sukhois. We also have an important water component, because Pengong Tso Lake is a massive water body, sir. And so how do you see it unfolding, sir, with respect to jointness?
I think we are seeing some brilliant examples of jointmanship in the way situation is unfolding now. One, you have mentioned about the fighter aircraft, and when it comes to the strategic mobility, the way we have rapidly sort of mobilized this time in Ladakh, and the kind of typical term that we are hearing now, mirror deployment which has been achieved, it couldn't have happened without the Air Force. So quite clearly we are seeing synergy of a very high order, and also we have seen several visuals coming out of Ladakh and Leh where the attack helicopter, the Apaches, are seen flying over. So I think we are seeing some very high order jointmanship. Talking about the Navy, you mentioned about the Pangong Tso Lake. Well, of course, there are reports in the media of some elements of the Navy being deployed. In fact, for that matter, if I can just quickly digress a little bit to my days in Kashmir, even over there at the Vura Lake, we had the Marcos deployed all along. And now, of course, we are also hearing about the MiG-29K of the Indian Navy getting deployed for the Northern Front. And we are also, of course, seeing in the media how surveillance equipment of the Navy is also being activated to be able to pick up early warning of what the enemy is doing. And even if you see the statements of the Raksha Mantri the other day when he addressed the Air Force Commanders Conference, while alluding to the disengagement talks that are going on, he clearly sort of said that we have to be prepared for all eventualities. So I think we are seeing a very high order of jointmanship which is being practiced, and it only has to get finer and better as we go into the future.
So my last question to you, and I would request you to give a detailed reply to this one question, sir, is, and this is a generic sort of a question, sir, given the PLA capabilities, and we know what those capabilities are, especially on the Tibetan Plateau, and how the PLA thinks and how the PLA executes, how compelling an argument is a Mountain Strike Corps? Because I'm sure, sir, like for example, you were in the DGMO, sir, when this was sanctioned, this Mountain Strike Corps. What was the thinking then, and how compelling an argument is a Mountain Strike Corps? At the end of the day, if I may put it to our viewers who are listening in, and most of them are from non-military backgrounds, the idea of any strike corps would also be to sort of put in an element of fear into the heart of the enemy. So that is the whole concept of a strike corps, a ferocious, fast-moving mass of not just men but also material, weapon systems and everything which goes deep inside the enemy territory, sir. So how compelling an argument is this Mountain Strike Corps?
You see, when you are defending a frontier of 3,000, almost 3,500 kilometers, you have to have capability for offense and defense both. One. Two, as a nation, we are not the ones that goes into the offensive. We do not, we haven't seen, preemptive offensive being undertaken by our country. So with that and the fact that we are very sensitive to loss of territory, so obviously in order to be able to create that maneuver space while the pivot corps are fighting their defensive battle, making limited gains or perhaps offering launch pads for the strike corps, we need formations. How they are configured, how they are organized, that's another point. But we need dedicated strategic reserves to be able to secure gains, which, as I mentioned even in my response to your previous question, which are there to be able to secure such gains that give you a position of strength at the time of conflict termination. Now, as far as, quite often you get this argument that it should be deterring the enemy. Well, it will deter the enemy indirectly. The primary role is to go and secure such objectives that give you a position of strength, and because of that capability, there will be an element of deterrence, which is an indirect impact. But the capability to be able to make substantial gains, I think, is the most crucial question. And it is not as if this requirement was never felt. It is just that we are taking time to develop this capability. Along the Western Front, we have 3 strike corps, literally one dedicated to each theatre with a certain amount of flexibility to be able to move from one to the other. Coming back to the Northern Front, from where were we creating our strategic reserves in the absence of the strike corps? we were using a term called dual task formation. That means formations that can be, sort of spared from the Western Front are made available to the Eastern Front. We have to be very clear that's a very, very, ad hoc kind of an arrangement. Why? Because again, I go back to my important point of orientation. In the absence of orientation, we cannot expect a very high order of effectiveness, from a formation like this. And of course, there are other issues besides familiarization. There are issues of acclimatization. There are issues of training, and there is a plethora of such points. You can go on and on. But the point is, we need dedicated offensive reserves, dedicated capability for securing objectives to be able to achieve this. So this has been in the offing for a while, and the argument has been compelling. In fact, it has been there right from the beginning of the 2000s. And the proposal was moved sometime around 2010, 2011. It is another matter that, in its, if we were to relate it to the birth of the Strike Corps, in its prenatal stage, it was in that, decade of, if I were to, a decade between 2004 and 2014, if I were to borrow a phraseology from Swami Vivekananda, it was in that, decade where we were in a sort of hypnotism of weakness, hypnotism of weakness coming out of inactivity, coming out of indecision. At that time, when Depsang happened, suddenly, an acceleration in the entire process, and we saw the Mountain Strike Corps taking birth. Having taken birth, it entered the crossfires of the competing priorities of modernization and expansion. So, navigating through this, it has, got into the shape that it has gone into, and obviously we are conditioning it to the multiple challenges, whether it is the terrain challenges, whether it is the budgetary challenges, and we have seen it in some shape last year in September, October during exercise Himvijay, and this capability is finally, eventually going to give you that kind of power that you're talking about. If I can again, take a little bit of cue from the history on the Chinese side only, in 1986-87, when we had, moved troops from Assam into Arunachal and the Sumdrongchu happened, what was the reaction on the Chinese side? The reaction was of panic, because along with exercise checkerboard, that is the exercise that was conducted in 86-87, when Falcon took place, the Chinese were in panic and they deployed all along the line of actual control. And from those 86-87, actually came these agreements and protocols that we are talking about, 1993, 96, 2005 and 2013, which obviously is again got overtaken given the new ambitions of China. So unless and until you have capability like this, unless and until you demonstrate this capability, you cannot get things on your terms. So I think it is absolutely critical to have capability like this. We have started with one, as I look at it. Ultimately, given the length of the border that we are talking about, we would require more such capability to be taking care of the northern theatre, eastern, and perhaps the central theatre.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. It was an honor and a privilege to host you for this episode of Blitzkrieg. Ladies and gentlemen, with Lieutenant General Subrata Sahu, we discussed a lot of things, how the Mountain Strike Corps was created, what is its primary duty. It goes across into the enemy's area, it fights there, it's different from a defensive or a pivot corps, and a lot of other things. The last point that I wish to make here on this program is that India must have the capability, and this is exactly what the general was saying, you must have that capability for that final argument against the enemy. If the enemy knows that you have a Mountain Strike Corps, what happens is that you win in diplomacy, you win on the negotiating table, because this is like a fearsome hammer that the enemy will fear. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Blitzkrieg. I'll see you next weekend again with another episode. Till then, from my team and I, Jai Hind.